Hello everyone, this is part 11 of What If Naruto Was a Prodigy and in the Anbu, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
The week after his promotion to Jonin, and the impromptu celebration at the Jonin's lounge, Naruto was once again hard at work. The details for the Chunin exams had been confirmed amongst the other three great villages, and the date had been set. Passports had been shipped off, the border guard were readied and the travel routes of the other cage were painstakingly plotted out. Konoha's intelligence worked hard to ensure that these routes remained secret. No other village was to know how each of the cage was to arrive, and Konoha could afford no mistakes on this. The land of fire, and Konoha, could ill afford the risk of an international incident if some group with a grudge mounted an attack on a diplomatic envoy within their borders. Despite the dangers, the village was well prepared, and it was soon time to begin the festivities. In a week's time, the 30th International Chunin exams were to be held in Konoha, and there was much work to be done. Visitors had begun to stream into the village, and it wouldn't be long until every hotel and apartment was full. The presence of Leafnin in the village almost doubled overnight, and the Chunin military police were run ragged as they tried maintaining some kind of order in the hustle and bustle of work. While many of the influx of visitors were of the working class, farmers and workers and soldiers, there was a significant number of local and foreign nobility arriving at the gates every day. Often escorted by shinobi that were usually not from Konoha, these nobles had a certain level of living that had to be accommodated for. Konoha's merchant guild usually tended to these visitors, putting on a magnificent festival and catering to the needs and wants of the upper class. Nobility were treated to quiet tea ceremonies and many paid quite handsomely to be served by the Hyuga, the noblest of the clans. Many attended calligraphy sessions, and the highest of the nobles even managed to sit alongside the third Hokage as he went about his own calligraphy. The Nara entertained those who fancied themselves as tactical thinkers, amusing and challenging them with logic puzzles, riddles and games of strategy. Luckily for Naruto, he was quite removed from all of that. For the past week, he had tended to whatever odd jobs he had been called for. As the personal aide of the Hokage, Uzumaki, Naruto held a surprising amount of authority on the day-to-day workings of the village, and he was able to somewhat cut out a lot of the red tape, especially when it came to time-sensitive matters. At the moment, Naruto was speeding towards the village gates, the wind whipping through his hair. The last time he had been summoned, it had been on the behest of an extremely wealthy patron from the land of wind who had been suffering from a bout of gastro. Red in the face and the stink of bodily fluids following him, the flabby man had sweated as he abused the Jonin guard at the gates, who had refused to allow him entry until all of the protocols had been followed. Naruto had smoothed things over, ensuring that the noble had been delivered to his hotel room as quickly as possible, and filing the paperwork himself. Apparently the noble had been extremely grateful, and Naruto had been awarded a nice little bonus alongside the completion of the D-rank mission. In a blur of movement, Naruto darted past the banners and weaved through the crowd, most who didn't even register his presence, and used the body flicker technique to close the rest of the distance. He appeared in the middle of Market Square in a crouch, and stood up. His headband gleamed in the sun and, clad in his Jonin vest and sporting a polite smile, Naruto made his way towards a stall, where an argument of some kind was taking place. A horse sat there, chewing on what seemed to be a potato lazily, while two shinobi flanked it. With dark skin and bright eyes, Naruto didn't need to see the headband to know that they were from Kumo. They were watching warily as their patron, a tall, round, portly man with dark skin and flamboyant robes, delivered a verbal lashing to one of the stall owners, who was paling and arguing back shakily. "Good morning," Naruto interjected as the noble took a pause to breathe. The noble started, and the two guards tensed and swung to face him. Naruto ignored them, and he adjusted his headband. "It's hardly a good morning," the noble spat out. He drew himself up, turning and looking Naruto up and down. "Who are you?" he asked with a sneer. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto," Naruto answered politely. He smiled. "I'm a representative from the Hokage's office. What seems to be the problem?" "Ah, Uzumaki-sama," the stall owner called out. He looked relieved to see him, beads of sweat dripping down his forehead. "This man has claimed that I have injured his animal, and he's demanding compensation." Naruto eyed the horse. It looked perfectly healthy to him, and it stared back at him without blinking. Naruto was the first to break the stare, turning back to the noble with raised eyebrows. Your animal looks fine to me, he said to the noble. What happened? I was enjoying a nice, pleasant ride throughout this little village, when this barbarian attacked my horse with a metal instrument of some kind. The noble answered indignantly. What nerve! Were we back home, I would have him put to the sword. How dare he lay his filthy hands on a beast of the land of lightning's nobility? I see, Naruto said. He turned to the stall owner, who was shaking his head vigorously. I was just selling my stock as usual, Uzumaki-sama, he said, voice trembling with emotion. And then this beast came up and started eating all of my vegetables. Did you strike it? Naruto asked quietly. The man looked miserable. Yes, with a pan, he replied, and then his voice took on a more defensive tone. But it was destroying my livelihood. I had a right to protect my merchandise. You had no right to mount an attack on myself or my belongings. The noble cried out dramatically. He gestured imperiously at the stall owner. Shinobi, I demand you take him away. Naruto released a hidden sigh on what was probably about to become a painful conversation. His eyes flickered over the Kumo nin, who continued to watch him carefully. He could see the tensed muscles, the carefully selected stances, and the lingering hands next to weapons pouches as if they expected Naruto to attack them at any moment. Sir, are you aware that you're not allowed to bring horses into the market square? Naruto asked the noble. The noble spluttered. Are you taking his side? You imbecile. He attacked me. Detain him. Naruto's smile grew even more polite. Your horse shouldn't have been here, he told the noble quietly. And while he shouldn't have attacked your horse, this man had every right to defend his business. I suggest that you take your animal and let bygones be bygones. Nobody seems to be hurt, and there's no need for this to go any further than it already has. The noble looked livid. You stupid, little boy. He hissed, venom dripping with each word. He raised a ring-covered finger and jabbed it at Naruto's chest. I didn't ask, nor did I want, the opinion of an idiotic, little, brat. Go away, and find me somebody who can take care of this for me. However, his last jab of Naruto was caught, and Naruto gripped the finger rather tightly. His smile stretched his face now, and his very being radiated a sense of politeness and civility. Yet, something flickered in his eyes and his smile was perhaps a little too fixed to his cheeks. I would suggest, Naruto began, his voice softer than ever but still able to be clearly heard, that you stop assaulting a shinobi of Konoha and stand down. He let go of the finger, and the noble brought it back to his chest with a cry of pain. He cradled it, looking aggrieved and pale. Guards! Defend me! He proclaimed loudly. He gestured at Naruto, who folded his arms and eyed the Kumo nin carefully. Detain this little peasant. The two Kumo nin looked distinctively uncomfortable. My lord, one of them began carefully. Are you aware that Uzumaki Naruto is the personal aide and assistant of the third Hokage? It would be unwise to provoke such a needless confrontation. What? The noble sounded incredulous. This little brat. He turned and looked Naruto up and down, looking decided unimpressed. He doesn't look like he's even graduated from the academy yet. Nonetheless, the Kumo nin replied. He turned to Naruto, and looked in straight in the eye. Uzumaki Naruto is an A-rank jonin of Konoha, known to Kumogakur as the right hand of God. From all accounts, he has earned his titles. Naruto met the gaze blankly as the lead shinobi signaled to his subordinate. The other Kumo nin gathered the reins of the horse and began to lead it out of the market. The leader nodded respectfully at Naruto, and firmly led the spluttering noble away from the stall. Thank you, Uzumaki-sama. The stall owner exclaimed in relief. I was worried there for a moment. It was no problem, Naruto said with a polite smile. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a little notebook. Opening it, he scribbled something down and passed it over the stall. The man took it with a questioning look. This is a receipt you'll be able to claim at the missions assignment office. It should cover the cost of any damaged or destroyed stock. Have a pleasant. Naruto trailed off, and he suddenly went rigid. His smile disappeared and his back straightened as an ominous and dangerous presence filled the market square. The stall owner appeared a little discomforted, but was otherwise unaffected. Naruto turned around, his chakra beginning to stir and his muscles tensing, as a group of shinobi walked through the street. The thickening bloodlust and sense of danger was coming from them. It was a group of Suna nin, a Jonin and 3 genin. The Jonin spotted Naruto first, and the 2 high-rank shinobi assessed each other almost instantly. Average height, 175 to 182 cm headband located, a Suna nin wearing a turban, with the left side of face covered distinctive red tattoos on right cheek and dark eyes identity confirmed. A rank Jonin of Sunagaku, Baki, the Desert Tempest member of Suna's advisory council, elite Jonin, and the 4th Kazekige's right-hand man, Jonin sensei of Suna's weapon. Baki seemed to have recognized him, and was watching him closely. Naruto was on edge as the other man assessed him. Baki was a powerful Jonin, possibly too powerful for Naruto to defeat. He was well respected, skilled in multiple areas, and a veteran of the Third Great War. Like Hitaki Kakashi and Maito Gai, Baki was one of those elite Jonin that had been identified as a possible contender for S rank. However, the carefully restrained bloodlust and murder did not come from him. Rather, it came from one of the genin. The other 2 were of little consequence, a tall, blonde-haired Kanoiki wielding a war fan on her back, and a tall boy wearing the battle paint of Suna's puppeteer corp. No, it was the one in the middle, the smallest and seemingly fragile of them all. His face was blank and smoothed over, dark shadows lay underneath his emotionless green eyes and a tattoo seemed to have been burned in the skin above his left eye. With red hair and a large gourd on his back, Naruto recognized the host of the one-tailed demon raccoon almost instantly. Despite being a genin, Gaara of the Sand had already achieved an A-rank rating in the bingo book, an opponent that only skilled jonin or well-equipped teams should ever confront. His mission history was rather poor, when compared to other shinobi of his rank. He had only ever achieved 8 C-ranked missions, and 1 B-ranked mission. However, given the ease with which he completed them, seemingly returning from them without so much as a scratch, plus his status as a demon host, and rumors of his instability and dangerous powers, other villages had assessed him higher than they usually might. It was almost ironic in a way. Gaara probably wasn't considered an A-rank shinobi by his own village, yet possible enemies had already recognized his strength as a powerful shinobi. The group of Suna shinobi walked past him, and Naruto tracked them with his eyes. The genin didn't even give him a glance, his age and his headband no doubt marking him as just another leaf nin. Baki, however, eyed him up and down, and Naruto kept his eye on the skilled jonin until he had disappeared from view. The stall owner, who had watched the group with Naruto, shivered. That was creepy, he muttered. Naruto started. He had almost forgotten that the man was there. He bid farewell, and left the market square in a flicker of movement. High above in the sky, a hawk let out a long, mournful screech, and Naruto appeared from his body flicker and glanced it. It screeched again, and Naruto spotted the orange cloth tied to its leg. It was a message to him, a priority order from the top. What had happened this time? 15 minutes later, Naruto found himself standing deep within the depths of Konoha's Department of Intelligence and Counterintelligence. Located next to the Anbu headquarters, the Department of Intelligence housed the secrets of Konoha's military, and was responsible for everything from troop movements, to the border guard, and the supplies lines to Konoha's various outposts within the Land of Fire. The department was led by the Jonin commander, Nara Shikaku, and it was in his office that Naruto found himself standing. Nara Shikaku was tall, deceptively thin man. Like many of the males of his clan, he wore his hair up a spiky ponytail and he sported a goatee at the end of his chin. His face was marred with 2 large scars on the right-hand side of his face, a souvenir from his encounter with Spike Gauntlet during the Third Shinobi War, but his eyes were undamaged and were dark, perpetually narrowed, and always assessing others with a shrewd look. He wore a dark green Jonin vest with a set of almost invisible golden bars on his lapels to signify his status. Naruto stood in front of his desk and waited as the Jonin commander scanned the document in front of him. The more the Nara seemed to read, the deeper his scowl got. It was a 4-page document, but the man was finished with it in a matter of moments, and, once he was done, he let out a tired groan. How annoying, he muttered darkly. He dropped the papers on his desk and glanced up at Naruto. You arrived quickly, and your punctuality is to be commended, Jonin Uzumaki. It was hard to tell when Nara was being sarcastic, but Naruto thought that it might have been praise. Thank you, sir, Naruto replied monotonously. He didn't allow himself to move, standing up straight and trying to give the best impression he could. He had only ever had a few meetings with the Jonin commander, usually a guest of the Hokage's, and they had been relatively early during his career as the Hokage's assistant. During those times, Naruto had always gotten the impression that Nara Shikaku had never really been that impressed with him. There was nothing to back up his claims, and the Jonin commander had never really spoken to him, but there had always been this look in his eye that had seen what Naruto was capable of and had found him wanting. It had left a lasting impression on Naruto, and he was eager to show that he was worthy of his rank. Already, he could see that the Nara seemed to hold him in a different light. It was just the way the other man was looking at him. The Hokage is currently in a private session with the feudal lord's favorite cousin, so I shall be delivering this mission to you, Shikaku explained, and he grimaced. Naruto shared his expression. Politics, it was so much easier as a shinobi. Shikaku motioned at a document on his table. Earlier today, I received a report from a team currently stationed within the Land of Birds, he continued. They were acting as Konoha's representatives on a bid of stock from the manufactorium. I believe you were the one who assigned that mission, actually. The manufactorium was the largest weapons factory in the world. They made everything from kunai, shuriken and explosive notes, to the windmill shuriken, siege equipment and storage seals. Most of the stock of weapons that Konoha, and any of the 5 great villages, used was from that factory. While they sold to practically anybody, they also held an auction of sorts every 3 or so years. Villages from all over the elemental countries could come and bid on an exclusive contract, which would give villages better rates and first preference on any and all stock. Last time, Iwa had won the contract, and had snapped up anything that Konoha had even glanced at. This time, Konoha had been determined to win that contract. Team Yuna, Naruto recalled. I assigned the mission about a week ago. Shikaku nodded. There's been an explosion, he told Naruto, whose eyes widened in surprise. 2 of the Kumo reps are dead, 1 of Suna's reps has lost a leg, and 2 of ours are in the hospital wing minor, but lasting, injuries. The Nara fixed Naruto with a grim look. Accusations have been thrown. According to witnesses, Leaf Nin was spotted at the scene just before the explosion occurred. The Nara sighed. This situation is troublesome, he grumbled. We don't need this, especially with the Chunin exams just around the corner. The Land of Bird is demanding answers, so we're going to send you. Naruto nodded determinedly. Yes, sir. You'll act as the personal representative of the 3rd Hokage, Shikaku briefed him. He shuffled some of the papers on his desk. The Hokage has a very good reputation amongst the small countries, so we're hoping to use that to convince the Land of Birds of our innocence. You'll go to the manufactorium and assist with the investigations in any way possible. Questions? Is this a solo mission, sir? Naruto asked. We can't really afford to spare any shinobi, Shikaku answered. He scowled. And frankly, the presence of multiple Leaf Nin will be seen more as an attempt at intimidation or coercion than negation. You'll go alone. Do your best, Jonin Uzumaki. Konoha wants this contract. Sir. Naruto saluted. The Land of Birds, a small country nestled in between 4 other countries. To the north was the border of the Land of Earth, a rugged, treacherous range of mountains and cliffs that even the most seasoned of shinobi would have trouble crossing. To the south lay the border of the Land of Wind, and beyond that were the vast salt flats and sand dunes of the spiraling sand sea. It was hot, dry, arid place, yet was perhaps the safest place to cross into the Land of the Birds, for on the eastern border was the Land of Rain. There were few constants in the elemental countries, but the presence of the 3 pillars of the old world was one of them. The first pillar was the Sarutobi Hiruzen, the man who had become known as the god of all shinobi, the master of all of the shinobi arts. The second pillar was his rival, the 3rd Chuchikage, Onoki, the master of dust release. The 3rd pillar was Hanzo the salamander. All 3 of them could remember a time where there had been no villages. They were the last, final remnants of the era of the clan wars, aging relics in a new, modern age. Yet their power could not be denied and, of all the 3 pillars, Hanzo the salamander was perhaps the most renowned, in his own way. Under his brutal rule, the Land of Rain had kept its independence as the 5 great villages rose into power. Although its lands had been used time and time again as a battlefield between the Land of Wind, the Land of Fire and the Land of Earth, Hanzo had driven back the intruders time and time again. A master of hand-to-hand combat, with the ability to deliver poisons with a single breath, and supplemented by his skill in kenjutsu, Hanzo was one of the finest water release users in the world, and he had taken on entire armies before and come out victorious. He was also extremely paranoid. Nobody entered the land of rain and lived to tell the tale. Nobody. Although it would have been more convenient, and much quicker, to travel through the land of rain to reach bird country, Naruto instead was forced to take the long, but safe, route. A highway ran from the land of fire, through river country and into the north of the land of wind, right up into bird country. It took him a day and a half, but eventually Naruto passed through the sweltering hot desert, bypassing the small towns that littered the side of the highway, and moving into the land of birds. It was a beautiful land to begin with, and in many ways it was similar to the land of fire. Despite a desert to the south, a rocky, arid land to the north, and a perpetual storm to the east, the plant life had managed to thrive and it rose to greet the warm, sunny skies. Crystal blue rivers and lakes dotted the landscape, and wildlife was abundant. It was an oasis in the middle of inhospitable lands, one that had seen relative peace throughout its days. This was probably due to three factors: the strategic negotiation and bargaining the land's previous feudal lord, the relative difficulty in actually entering the land, and the land of birds' close relationship with its western neighbor the land of iron. The land of iron was home to the samurai legions, and the only modern power to invest entirely in the somewhat outdated military power. Most of the elemental countries had moved to a system of hidden villages, preferring the flexibility, utility, and cunning of a shinobi over the brute force of a samurai legion. Samurai were a combination of heavy-plated, almost antique armor, fused with advanced equipment like respirators and inbuilt short-wave radios. Where the use of ninjutsu and genjutsu by shinobi muddled and scrambled radio waves, the samurai utilized chakra in a different way that apparently kept them from having similar problems. With a force of 20 legions, with 5,000 samurai per legion, the land of iron contained a military force that no hidden village wanted to fight. As Naruto moved closer and closer to the eastern border of the land of birds, the ground became more rugged and mountainous. The foliage began to become less dense, green giving way to brown as the plants and trees began to thin. A lone mountain appeared on the horizon, and the ground became cracked. Black, twisted rocks were strewn over the drying, parched land as Naruto darted towards the mountain. A glow was beginning to catch his eye, and he could see dark plumes of smoke rising into the sky. The mountain was not a mountain, it was an active volcano. It rose high up into the sky, plumes of smoke rising from it, and streams of molten rock surging down the sides with an ominous glow. Little structures had been built on the slope of the volcano, and tiny little figures were moving up and down the rocky slope. At the base of the volcano, giant walls of dulled black rock began to emerge, and Naruto took his first look at the manufactorium. It was an enormous facility, more of a city than a factory, and it rivaled Konoha in size. It was surrounded by a set of thick, iron walls, which loomed up over the facility and blocked much of it from view. Surrounding the city was a large moat, but instead of water it held a giant pool of glowing, molten rock. Large drawbridges spanned the distance of the moat, at least a dozen, and half of them had a peculiar set of iron tracks built upon them. Before Naruto's eyes, a pair of carriages sped down one of the tracks, loaded to the brim with coal. Long ropes had been tied to the front, and it was being pulled by a squad of bare-chested men. They were muscular, and covered in sweat and soot, and towed the pair of connected carts over the drawbridge and into the facility. Naruto was impressed. His black cloak flapped about him, and the filters built into his mask couldn't fully mask the smell of sulfur and iron. He landed at the foot of one of the drawbridges and came to a halt. He could hear the sounds of distant clangs, of metal banging on metal and the rattles of assembly lines. In front of him, a pair of crimson-eyed samurai gripped their swords. Clad in gray-plated armor, their faces covered by a filtered mask, and sporting a spiked helmet, they were intimidating figures that loomed over the young Anbu. Naruto didn't let any of his discomfort show as he took off his mask, revealing his face. The smell of sulfur and smoke increased in intensity, but it barely fazed him. "Good afternoon," Naruto said with a polite smile. He held up a scroll bearing the wax seal of the Hokage's office. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto. I'm here on behalf of the village hidden in leaves. I've been told that there was an incident here involving our shinobi, and I've come to sort this all out." One of the samurai took the scroll. The other kept a careful eye on Naruto, his hand wrapped around one of the four swords strapped to his armor. Naruto waited patiently as the samurai opened the scroll and read the contents. Then, He held his helmet and bent his head, as if he was listening to something. Naruto watched with interest as the warrior used the short-range radio built into his helmet to communicate with his superiors. Radio technology had never really spread into most of the elemental countries. While the benefits of it were immense, shinobi had long ago found that the use of chakra severely disrupted radio waves, and a single moderately powerful technique could scramble every radio within a kilometer. In a battle, such disruption had been proven deadly. During the First Shinobi War, 3 platoons of Sunanin, who had been outfitted with the newly developed radio technology of the time, had been completely routed by 2 Iwachunin in what had become known as one of the biggest military blunders of the war. The samurai nodded and moved his hand away from his helmet. "Your presence has been approved," he said, his voice distorted by his mask. His partner stood down as the samurai stood aside. "You may cross the bridge and enter the manufactorium." "Thank you," Naruto said politely. He placed his mask back over his face, inwardly relieved that he could block some of that terrible smell, and strode past the samurai. He walked over the bridge, taking a peek over the side and observing the hot, writhing magma below. At the other side of the bridge, just before a set of spiked, iron gates, he was met by a man dressed in faded, sooty robes, and a small squad of samurai. "Greetings, Leaf Nin," the man whined. Or, at least to Naruto, it sounded like a whine. The man was thin and reedy. The little of his face that wasn't covered with ash and dust was pale and clammy, and his thinning hair was plastered down on his forehead by a layer of sweat. His voice was the worst part, however, high-pitched and with a strange tremor that gave him the whine of a young, spoiled child. "Welcome to the manufactorium," the man continued nasally. He tried to smile, but all that came out was a grimace. "I'm Takuji. I'm one of the administrators appointed by the feudal lord. Thank you for coming." As a courtesy, Naruto removed his mask, and he managed a bland smile. "I'm just hoping that I can be of some help," he said quietly. "Konoha has always enjoyed good relations with the manufactorium, and we'd like to keep it that way." "Indeed." Takuji managed a long sniff. The samurai held position around him, and to Naruto it was almost surreal. The smallest samurai still towered over Naruto, and most of them looked like they could pick him up and snap him like a twig. Nonetheless, the way they seemed to watch him like a hawk suggested that they were just as wary of him as he was of them, a mutual caution that Naruto could respect. Takuji turned, and motioned for Naruto to join him, and, as the samurai took positions around them, the 2 representatives walked through the iron gates and entered the manufactorium. The outer streets of the enormous facility were dirty and crowded. Rows upon rows of rickety sheds had been crammed together, made of corrugated iron that had long since rusted. Many of them had moldy couches and chairs outside, and sooty-skinned, skinny men and women gazed up at them blankly as the entourage walked past them. Dirty, grubby children played on the street, darting in and out of dark alleyways with little fear. Many of them wore rags that might have once passed for a tunic, and they were covered in grease, soot and dirt. A group of them watched Takuji and Naruto pass, and a wide-eyed boy must have gotten too close because one of their samurai escorts roughly shoved the child out of the way, and he fell to the ground. No sound escaped him, and he didn't seem too hurt as grubby kid jumped to his feet and darted nimbly away. This street of hovels seemed to stretch on forever, but Takuji turned at a street corner and Naruto was brought out of the slums area and into a wide, busy street. "These must have been the path that led from the factories to the main gates," Naruto observed, noting the iron tracks on the ground. Behind him were the tall, imposing gates, and ahead were the giant iron factories, with large, tall chimneys puffing out copious amounts of dirty smoke. The factories had been built on the slope of the volcano, and streams of molten rock poured down the rocky slope, in between the factories and into a series of giant vats. Many of the factories were connected by a series of metal walkways that crisscrossed their upper floors. Small watchtowers dotted these walkways, and the largest of these sat in the middle of all of the factories. It was the tallest building within the facility, and it loomed up above over everything else. Takuji noticed Naruto assessing a group of grubby men in overalls walking past them and began speaking. "They mostly come from the countryside," Takuji said conversationally as he led Naruto deeper and deeper into the manufactorium. "It is messy work, but we pay better than the farms and vineyards. They come here and work in the mines. The strong ones haul the carts to and fro. The weak work in the factories." Naruto eyed a pair of exhausted children who were staggering away from the factories, their faces dirty and their hands covered in blisters. With their lack of muscle mass, he wondered how they could possibly be good workers. The stench of the coal factories became more prominent the closer Naruto got. The giant road had widened, and there were many pairs of tracks leading from dozens of different streets and avenues. A platoon of bare-chested men were grunting as they jogged past Naruto, pulling behind him a rail cart filled to the brim with wooden boxes. Naruto got a glimpse of the insignia on one of the boxes, noting it to be the symbol of the land of rice. They entered one of the factories and Naruto was hit in the face by a wave of blistering heat. A series of rails had been built into the wall, steel wire suspending small, blackened vats. On one end, a foreman was shouting as he directed a group of tough-looking men to turn a giant wheel. With every turn, the steel wire was pulled in, and the vat slowly moved over the factory floor. A whistle sounded, the men stopped and the vats paused, suspended in midair. With another yell, a lever was pulled and the vats tipped upside down, releasing a stream of glowing molten steel into a series of giant tanks. They metal huffed and puffed, steam rising and falling with a loud whistling noise, and something groaned and clanked in the background. Coal was shoveled into giant furnaces, and another wheel was spun. Leading from the giant tanks were a series of assembly lines, manned by dozens of women and children. They all wore thick gloves, but little else, and as the assembly began moving away from the giant tanks, gleaming metal objects were dropped onto it. Newly smelted kunai and shuriken were inspected by the workers, and every time they came across a defect they would pick it up with the thick gloves and toss it on another assembly line behind them, one moving into the giant tanks. At the end of the assembly line was a chute, where the weapons fell down into the depths tank to be melted down and reforged. Naruto took all of this in with some degree of awe. If the factory kept producing a similar quantity of kunai and shuriken all day, there would be enough weapons to outfit an entire division, along with some to spare. It's a very efficient process, Takuji boasted proudly. One of the women at the assembly coughed into her hand, and Naruto saw something red and sticky. She wiped it on her tattered dress, smoothed over her lank, damp hair, and got back to work again. Yes, Naruto said quietly. Efficient. Takuji led him past the factory line and up a metal walkway. The stairs twisted and turned, and Naruto found himself over the factory floor, watching the hundreds of workers below scurry about. A door was opened outside and he walked out, right into thick, hazy smog. The filters on his mask filtered the worst of it, and Takuji let out a hacking cough, covering his mouth with his fist. This way, the thin, pale man said. He didn't seem to notice his hand trembling as he gestured to the large watchtower in the midst of all of the factories. They walked on the metal walkway. Naruto's footsteps were silent, but the steps of their samurai escort made the railing shudder and groan. They moved past the first factory, and below them Naruto saw a cart being pulled up against the side of another factory. It was filled with what looked like shrapnel twisted shuriken, blunted kunai, shattered swords, and so forth. A giant chute had been built into the side of the factory, and the cart was brought to the very edge and tipped over. Scavengers, Takuji explained. He wiped his nose with a dirty cloth, and sniffed. The outcasts of society, really, gangs filled with crippled soldiers, genin rejects, and people who couldn't find work outside the battlefields of shinobi. Naruto watched a weary group of scavengers trundle off. I see, he said neutrally. He wondered if there were any former students of Konoha's Shinobi Academy amongst that group. What a sad fate, rejected as a shinobi, unable to defend your village or uphold the will of fire. Truly, Naruto wondered if somebody like that was better off dead. Takuji took him within the watchtower, and led him through hallways of faded wallpaper and creaking ceiling fans. Eventually, they reached a set of tacky double doors, and Takuji threw them open with an exhausted sigh. A fan blazed on high speed, and papers rustled underneath the breeze. Takuji made his way through the room, and sat behind a long desk filled to the brim with papers. Sweat beaded on the administrator's forehead, the fans doing little to mitigate the sweltering heat emanating from the factories. Here, Takuji said, and he threw Naruto a manila folder. Naruto caught and opened it. 2 days ago, a shinobi wearing a headband of the leaf attacked the outskirts of the rail yards, Takuji explained as Naruto read through the witness reports. He had an unknown number of allies, and 5 samurai were killed before they detonated a series of explosive tags and disappeared. I see, Naruto murmured. Naturally, Konoha had nothing to do with this. Of course you didn't, Takuji scoffed. If you wanted to attack us, you wouldn't be wearing your headbands. Of course, he added shrewdly, if you wanted to attack us and you didn't want us to suspect you, you would wear your headbands, thereby making it, too, obvious that you were the culprits. Of course, you would know that I was capable of reaching that conclusion, so you wouldn't wear your headbands, therefore I wouldn't suspect you, because if you did do it, you would wear your headbands. Takuji trailed off, shaking his head disparagingly, while Naruto observed him with surprise from behind his mask. He hadn't expected such a dangerous ability of reasoning behind the thin, little man. Well, we didn't do it, Naruto confirmed after a few moments of awkward silence. He cleared his throat. What was the target? We think it was Rail Distribution Center, Takuji answered. Most of our raw materials are sent through their iron ore, diamond dust, gold. There's enough there to fund the Fourth Shinobi War. Of course, he added despairingly, with Shinobi, who knows? All we can do is keep a close guard on everything and wait for reinforcements from the Land of Iron. I see, Naruto said and placed the folder down. Where's the delegation from Konoha at the moment? All foreign shinobi are in lockdown, Takuji replied. The explosion took out 2 representatives from Kumo, and it injured one of your chunin. They're currently in the medical wing under heavy guard. Please take me to them. Naruto hadn't been expecting much, and had been pleasantly surprised to enter a relatively clean and sanitized hospital. Whatever methods they had of keeping the soot and smoke out of the building worked well, and he felt rather dirty as he strode past the crimson-eyed samurai guards. He was escorted past the front desk and taken to a secure ward on the 3rd floor. Inside a room, he found Team Yuna. Hello, Naruto greeted quietly as he entered the room. The leader of the team was a woman named Yuna, a pretty woman in her 30s with odd purple eyes and long silver hair. A bang covered her left eye, and she wore a flak vest that exposed more cleavage than what was probably necessary. A long, coiled whip was strapped to her back, and a bandage had been wrapped around her right shoulder. Behind her were 2 chunin, each wearing a bandana, although one was blue and the other was red. A man lay in the bed, bandaged up but breathing steadily, and he wore a green bandana. Ferret-sama, the chunin with the blue bandana gasped. Hey, Blue, Naruto replied. He removed his mask and smiled politely. How's Green? Yuna was a good jonin, and she had earned her a rank, but like many other shinobi she was a little eccentric. Her memory for names was completely abysmal, and despite the fact that she had led her team for over 10 years, first as a genin squad and then as a team of chunin, she had never remembered the names of her subordinates. Her solution: give them each a different colored bandana, and refer to them as colors. It had worked surprisingly well, to the point where even Naruto only knew them by the colors of their headbands. I'm good, Green slurred. He giggled. Oh yeah, I'm so good right now. If by good you mean completely shit-faced on pain meds, then yeah, Red muttered. He looked embarrassed. You're embarrassing us, Green. Quiet, brats. The grown-ups need to talk, Yuna barked. I'm 23, Red grumbled, but he fell silent. Yuna and Naruto stepped outside. How are you? Naruto asked quietly. I'm fine, Yuna replied. She managed a tight smile. The samurai already didn't like us that much, and this hasn't helped. I think we're one mistake off being lynched. Just keep your head down, Naruto advised. Now, what can you tell me? Not much, Yuna answered regretfully. We didn't see much. We were being taken on a tour of the facilities along with the rest of the delegates from the other villages that Takuji guy likes showing off. There was a commotion. It only lasted for about 10 seconds. There were at least a dozen of them, but before we could move to engage, one of them lit a whole reel of explosive tags under our feet. Naruto frowned. The container shielded most of us, but the Kumo-nin were fucked, Yuna continued. By the time the dust had settled, most of them had gone. Honestly, they didn't look like they were expecting us, and they scattered pretty quickly. Naruto took all of this in. I think I need to see where this all happened, he said. Yuna nodded. We'll stay here. Be careful, Ferret. It didn't take a lot of arguing to get Takuji to agree to let him have a look at the scene of the attack. Naruto got the feeling that the samurai weren't making a lot of progress, and that the administrator was hoping that he'd make some progress. With his samurai guard, Naruto was escorted to the rail distribution center. It was a huge yard, filled with containers and rail lines extending out to the outer walls of the facility. Even this far out from the factories, the blistering heat still remained as clouds gathered overhead. In the middle of the site was a huge crater, big enough to stack a couple of homes in there with room to spare. Samurai poured over the sight like ants, the glowing crimson eyes standing out in the darkness as the sun began to set. Much of the center had been taped off, and even with the giant crater in the middle of the rail yards, business around them still went on as usual. Carts were towed in and pulled out, many taken to the huge warehouse at the end of the yard. Naruto ignored them all as he stood at the bottom of the crater. He knelt down, breathing deeply and picking up a handful of soil. While he was no sensor, he had worked enough with elemental chakra to know what he was looking for. That said, the residue of earth elemental chakra was quite tricky to detect, and it took a few minutes before Naruto could be certain. Somebody had been underground, probably planting those explosives. What for, though? Naruto stood up, drumming his fingers on the side of his utility pouch. Was this an assassination attempt? Were the targets the Kumo Nin? Had the attackers wanted something else? Or had it been a defensive ploy, a way to ensure a successful retreat? What did they want? There was only one other thing of interest, and it took a few moments to travel there with his samurai guard. He was taken to the large granite walls, where a small samurai contingent stood guard around a breach. Somebody had cut a neat rectangle right through the solid rock, and Naruto bent down to observe it. It was a perfectly even cut, and the metal had been welded shut before it had even had a chance to drip down onto the ground. Huh, Naruto uttered quietly. The samurai watched him from behind their masks without a sound. Naruto ignored them and pondered the cut. It was obviously the result of a technique, probably lightning technique. There were definitely signs of the piercing properties of lightning elemental chakra, but Naruto couldn't think of a technique that could do this so cleanly. It had to be a technique like Kakashi's lightning blade, something intensely focused, and it was definitely something powerful. Whatever it was, Naruto was sure that it wasn't the work of an amateur, or an intelligent band of thieves or bandits. No, this was the work of a powerful shinobi, and Naruto frowned as he stood back up, absently wiping his hands on his robes. Whoever it was, Naruto still didn't know what they wanted. Let's go back, he murmured to his guard. The sun had gone down and night had fallen, but in many ways Naruto couldn't really tell the difference. The glow of the flowing molten rock coming from the volcano the manufactorium had been built around lit the skies all around them. Dark, thick clouds obscured the stars and the moon, but the smoke and smog reflected a lot of the light back down onto them. And, all around them, the huge factories kept on working. Metal clanged on metal, furnaces roared and carts were pulled in and out as the facility continued to pump out thousands upon thousands of weapons. The temperature was only marginally better during the night, and Naruto could feel himself sweating behind his mask. With a sigh, he took it off and placed it on the table next to him. At the other end of the small room that Naruto had been allocated, Yuna chuckled. It does get hot here, she said. She threw her hair back over her shoulder and leaned back in her chair. It's a crappy place to be. It's hot and noisy, and it smells bad. Konoha is a paradise compared to this. No arguments here, Naruto muttered. He leaned back on his own chair and took a drink from his canteen. He was being conservative with it, as the tap in the kitchen had produced a black, slimy residue that might have once been water. Yuna watched him from the corner of her eye, smiling. Naruto caught the look. What? He asked. Yuna just kept smiling, and shook her head. Anyway, she said. As I was saying, I bet that the attackers are the 3rd Kazekage's Legion. That's just a myth, Naruto scoffed. He took another sip. There's no such thing. There is so. Yuna argued. She grinned darkly. The 3rd Kazekage's top men still searching high and low for their former master, leaving no stone unturned and no witnesses. She leaned in, and waggled her fingers. Scary. Uh-huh, Naruto uttered. He grinned. No, it was the 4th Mizukagen tide, coming to purge the lands of the dirty and the unclean. No, it Hanzo the salamander, coming to prove once and for all that he's still the strongest. Yuna rebutted wildly. You know how he hates those samurai. No, it was Uchiha Madara and the ghosts of the Uchiha clan, coming to. Naruto paused as he detected a near imperceptible flinch from Yuna. He grimaced. Sorry, he apologized. Bad taste. No, it's fine, Yuna said with a sigh. She rested her elbows on the table and leaned her chin on her outstretched arms. One of my genin teammates was from the Uchiha clan. He was a nice guy, a bit stuck up, but weren't they all? Naruto didn't remember them that well, to be honest, but he nodded anyway. The mood of the room had darkened, and there was no more joking between the two jonin. After a few moments, Naruto let out a sigh and pulled out a small, battered book. A bingo book? Yuna asked curiously. Trying to see if there's anybody in here with a notable lightning-based technique, Naruto explained. He gestured at the page he had flipped it on. I've only gone through the first half, but this guy might fit the criteria. Kumo's Thunder Cannon, Yuna read. A ranked missing nin from Kumo, wanted for the theft of the daimyo's prized scepter and the murder of 17 chunin. It looks like he has the ninjutsu to carve a hole through thick iron plate. And he's got a history of stealing stuff, Naruto added. He shrugged. It might be him. Still, we're assuming that it's the work of a missing nin. It might have been a village-sanctioned operation. Who'd risk pissing off the manufactorium? Yuna questioned. She chewed on a strand of hair thoughtfully as she spoke. You don't fuck around with the people who make your weapons, or grow your food. It's a given. If one of the villagers knew that they weren't going to win the contract, then maybe they thought they'd stuff it up for everybody else, Naruto theorized. Yuna opened her mouth to respond when a deafening explosion ripped through the air. The walls shuddered, and both Naruto and Yuna sprung to their feet in an instant. Naruto raced for the window and frantically peered outside. A great plume of smoke was rising in the west, where the rail distribution center was located. As he watched, Naruto caught a flicker of movement, and he saw an unmanned railway cart slowly rolling down a dip. Then, in an instant, it exploded in a great column of fires. The walls rumbled again, and the boom was another to shatter the window in front of him. Whistles were being blown, and an alarm was beginning to fill the air. Naruto watched as factory doors were sealed shut and sooty. Panicked workers scurried about looking for shelter. Legions of samurai were already heading towards the scene of the attacks as another explosion ripped through the manufactorium. What's the plan? Yuna asked from behind him. Naruto kept his eyes peeled. He had a very good view from the top of the tower, and he couldn't actually see any fighting occurring. The samurai were very efficiently securing the areas, but smaller, secondary explosions kept taking place, keeping the local guard off balance. Naruto narrowed his eyes, his suspicions growing. There was a commotion outside and Yuna whirled around. Her whip was in her hand, and she was twirling it around her head carefully, ready to lash out. Naruto summoned his chakra, and prepared a technique, but when the door opened, it was only Takuji, who looked harried. Do you know what's going on? He demanded. No, Naruto answered, and turned around. He kept watching the fires. No more than what you do. You seem to be under attack. The samurai will catch them, Takuji said decisively. No they won't, Naruto replied. He looked over his shoulder, his face deadly serious. This is a trap, or a distraction. I don't think your samurai will find anybody down there. What? Takuji sounded bewildered. Ah, Yuna made a noise of comprehension from behind him. She understood. All of those explosions had been scary and flashy, but they really hadn't done a lot of damage. True, molten rock was beginning to seep through a large hole blown in the ground, but most of the facilities hadn't even been affected. Either the explosions had been designed to lure somebody out for an assassination attempt, or they were a diversion, a way to keep the samurai occupied while the perpetrators carried out the true mission. Naruto tore his eyes away from the fires and scanned the other side of the city. It had all been sealed up tight and there was nothing really wait. Did you see that? Naruto asked Yuna. See what? Yuna asked. Over there, Naruto pointed to a darkened section of the city, on the opposite end of the explosions right up against the wall. There was a flash of yellow light, just for a second. Samurai patrol. Yuna hazarded a guess. Naruto was frowning. What's over there? He asked Takuji, who moved forward to see where he was pointing at. Exports, Takuji answered distractedly. He kept glancing at the fires and the smoke, and was flinching every time a small explosion would occur. We send out our shipments of merchandise through there. It's all locked up for the night. The first cart usually goes out first thing in the morning. Is that so? Naruto murmured. Let me guess, you've got a shipment going out tomorrow, don't you? Well, yes, Takuji replied. There's a shipment for the land of rice that's scheduled to leave tomorrow morning. They ordered 400,000 units of basic weapons and supplies. Is it guarded? Naruto asked. There it was again, the yellow flash of light. There's a contingent of guards there, but most of them, Takuji trailed off as comprehension dawned on him. Most of them would have fallen back to take defensive positions in more strategic areas. Naruto smiled grimly. They know your routines, he realized. They knew what you would do. They set off the explosions, lured your guard away, and they're probably killing who's left right now. What? Takuji sounded bewildered. It's simple misdirection, Yuna answered for Naruto. She pointed at the explosion. Pretend to attack there, but really attack over there. Takuji was silent for a moment. Then, he burst into action. Guards! He bellowed, and a pair of samurai entered the room. I want an entire division converging on sectors. Wait. Naruto interrupted, and he turned around. Takuji paused during mid-sentence, looking furious. Every second we delay is a second that the enemy has to get away. He snapped. They know your routines, Naruto said harshly. And I bet they've cracked your radios. If you send a division there, they'll disappear and probably try again. Then I should let them get away. Takuji looked indignant. No, Naruto answered. Just don't play into their hands. If they know your strategy, then do something that you normally wouldn't do. He smiled dangerously. For example, instead of sending samurai, send shinobi like us. Takuji narrowed his eyes and contemplated Naruto carefully. We're quick and stealthy enough to catch up to them before they realize we're there, Yuna added. Her eyes gleamed. Besides, I still owe them for what they did to Green. What do you want? Takuji was instantly suspicious. Shinobi never work for free. What's your price? Naruto made a split-second decision. Konoha will make a reasonable offer on the contract. We want you to accept it up front. No negotiations. Takuji froze for a second. He was contemplating the offer, and Naruto turned back to the window. There was nothing instantly suspicious about Export Station, and he couldn't see any more flashes of yellow light. Still, every instinct in his body was telling him that something was going on over there. The getting away, Naruto reminded as Takuji thought about it. Deal, Takuji finally agreed. He took a deep breath. But so help me, Shinobi. If I find out that this was a trick. It's no trick, Naruto assured him. He smiled politely. Excuse us, Administrator. We're going to go and solve your problem. Yuna and Naruto leapt out of the window and disappeared in a blurring of movement. The skies were lit up with fire and smoke as Yuna and Naruto darted through the desolate streets of the manufactorium. Their footsteps were lost amidst the whistles and clanging bells as the samurai continued to fall for the enemy's ruse. As they darted through the streets, they occasionally passed a squad of patrolling samurai, their swords out and ready for combat. Yet, as they came closer and closer to the export station, the streets became eerily silent and still. There were no houses this far out, only a series of large, steel warehouses and railway tracks. Large container carts stood motionless on the tracks, and large stacks of thick, sturdy containers began to line up around them. It was beginning to get hotter, and Naruto figured that they couldn't be too far away from the moat of molten rock that surrounded the facility. The two Jonin were silent as they skulked in the shadows. Naruto was clad in his dark Anbu robes and his mask covered his face. Yuna held her whip in her hands, ready to use it if necessary, as the two Jonin silently infiltrated the export station and began to make their way forward. Naruto could feel his heart pounding beneath his armor, and adrenaline surged through his veins. Every fiber of his body was tense, and in some ways this skulking about was worse than the actual combat, the dreaded anticipation of combat, the possibility of an ambush. It was enough to make lesser shinobi falter or make a mistake. Naruto and Yuna did not, but they were almost caught off guard as the enemy sprung their trap. The only thing that gave it away was a slight creak of metal. Then, Naruto's eyes widened and he broke out of the shadows, darting away and leaping up off of the ground and onto the top of one of the railway carts. Yuna was by his side in an instant and the two of them sprinted away. Behind them, the large stacks of containers slowly tilted downwards and with a loud shriek of splitting metal, they fell out of their bindings and collapsed to the ground. The noise was deafening, much worse than the explosions, and Naruto almost lost his balance. There was a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye, and as he righted himself he spun around, his hands flipping into a series of seals. A shinobi had lunged at him, but in that split second Naruto reared his head back as heat blossomed in his throat. Fire release. Great wave of flame. The shinobi was less than a meter away from Naruto, and was instantly enveloped in the giant wave of flame. He screamed as he was pushed away from Naruto, catching alight and disappearing underneath the writhing flames. The ground was still rumbling as the last of the containers fell, but Naruto heard a distinctive crack and saw Yuna brandishing her whip. She had wrapped it around the arm of another of the enemy, and she tossed him aside with a flick of her wrist. Naruto heard sizzling, and his eyes widened. Scatter, he yelled, and disappeared in a body flicker. A second later, the railway cart they had been standing on exploded in a flash of fire. Naruto had avoided most of the blast, but he felt a dull thump in the back of his armor where some of the debris must have caught him. He dove to the ground, and sidestepped a series of shuriken. He looked up, watched as the enemy came forth from the shadows, more than 20 of them. Their headbands glinted underneath the fiery wreckage of the railway cart, the etched symbol of the village hidden in rain almost glowing. They were Rain Nin, but Naruto hadn't heard of an active squad, let alone a whole platoon, of Rain Nin being sighted outside of the land of rain in years. The odds were not in his favor. Two Jonin of Konohagaki were up against a platoon of Rain Nin. Less than a second after they had revealed themselves, Naruto had hurled a fistful of shuriken at the platoon of Rain Nin and formed a hand sign. Shuriken shadow clone technique. The fistful became hundreds and they hurled forward with an almost greenish glow. The Rain Nin scattered and the storage container they were standing up crumbled underneath the power of Naruto's attack. In that brief moment, Naruto formed another hand sign and his chakra surged. Shadow clone technique. 5 puffs of smoke burst into existence around him and Naruto disappeared within it. Then, before it had dissipated, 6 blurs of movement rocketed out from the smoke and began to attack the enemy. Metal clashed on metal and kunai rained through the air as the squad of identical white-masked Anbu moved to engage the enemy. There was a blasting crack as Yuna attacked as well, her whip whirling about her. 4 Rain Nin moved to engage her, 2 of them wielding steel-braced umbrellas. They opened them and a hail of senbon rained down on her, but they were all deflected by the whip that spun around her. Then, while keeping the whip still spinning wildly around her, Yuna lashed out and the tip of the whip shot forward. There was a metallic clank, and the first Rain Nin didn't even have time to widen his eyes before a gleaming sickle-like blade tore through his throat. Nearby, Naruto ducked underneath a powerful but clumsy blow and grabbed the Rain Nin's vest. The woman's eyes widened as she tumbled forward, her balance lost, and shrieked as Naruto's foot came up on the back of her leg. There was an audible snap, and the woman collapsed. Naruto palmed a kunai and thrust it down on the woman's skull, but then she burst into smoke, and was replaced by a wooden sleeper. A second later, 2 others came to engage him, one wielding a giant spiked umbrella, and Naruto was forced to engage them. His shadow clones were fighting nearby, and one of them had successfully looped a spool of wire around a Rain Nin's throat. The burly man was on the ground, choking and gasping as the shadow clone above him gripped the wire tight. One of the Rain Nin comrades lunged at the shadow clone, a kunai glinting in his hand, and the clone was dispelled with a mighty stab. The burly Rain Nin collapsed, wheezing and gasping, but his victory was short-lived as the primed explosive tag on the man's back detonated. The ground shuddered and dirt and metal whizzed through the air, pelting the surroundings with debris and taking out both the burly man and his comrade. Yuna was on a roll as she moved through the lines of the Rain Nin with extreme aggression. Her whip flew and whipped past her, moving in ways that defied natural movement. It gave off a light blue glow as her chakra danced through the flexible steel wire, making it lash out at everything around her. It allowed her to defend herself from attack with the base of the whip, while still using the bladed tail to attack. 2 Rain Nin were defending against her furious onslaught, kunai and sickle meeting with showers of sparks, while Yuna deflected a hail of senbon from a third and used her free hand to throw a series of explosive notes. The third Rain Nin was forced to fall back as the ground around him was pelted with explosions, and this allowed Yuna time to advance. Her arm came up, and suddenly the base of her whip lashed out in a loop, catching one Rain Nin off guard and wrapped around his neck. The steel wire tightened and the man stiffened, a puff of reddish air leaving his mouth, before he was dropped to the ground. The other Rain Nin fell back, but the sickle-like blade caught up with him and took him in the ankle. He collapsed, and a second later he was dead. The Rain Nin were numerous, but they were not as skilled as the Leaf Nin. The 2 elite Jonin pushed them back further and further in the next few moments. A lightning technique lit up the air as Naruto sent a wave of cascading bluish-purplish bolts forward, cracking the ground and causing a stack of containers to fall to the ground. A deafening boom filled the air again, while Yuna used her whip to attach a sizzling explosive note to the chest of one of the Rain Nin. His comrades abandoned him and he let out a terrible scream as the note detonated in roar of fire, smoke and dirt. The Rain Nin had come together and had formed a defensive formation. Their movements were sluggish, and they had clearly not been expecting this level of resistance. Naruto and Yuna continued to press forward, and the Rain Nin retreated further and further back into the depths of the export station. Several of them threw out containers of water, and one of the Rain Nin made a few hand seals. Chakra surged and the water bottles exploded, a giant torrent of water gushing out towards the ground. The Rain Nin leapt up onto one of the railway carts, while Naruto formed a series of hand signs and pressed his hands on the ground. Earth release, earth-style wall. The railway tracks underneath his hands groaned and splintered as a tall wall of earth rose from the ground. It tore through the tracks and pushed aside a storage container, rising up to be 5 times Naruto's height. A second later, it shuddered as the torrent of water slammed against it, but it held and the water was diverted. Naruto leapt up, his chakra surging, and made a series of hand signs. His heart pounding, he reached the top of the wall and pressed his hands to his lips. Fire release, fire dragon flame bullet technique. Fire chakra leapt from his tenketsu, and he propelled it out of his mouth in a giant stream. It reared up, taking the form of a writhing, angry dragon, which roared into the night sky. Naruto kept his hands in the tiger seal, and under his direction the dragon of flame broke apart into 3 separate streams of swirling flame, 2 which arced to the left and right of the Rain Nin, and the main body of the attack soaring overhead to attack from behind. It left the Rain Nin no choice and they advanced from the defensive positions as the dragon of flames enveloped the railway cart they were on and chased after them. Naruto stared at him, his hands in the tiger seal, as the remaining enemy shinobi charged at him, fire nipping on their heels. Then, he released the seal and jumped backwards, off of the wall as a barrage of kunai whizzed past him. In a flash of movement, Naruto reached into his pouch and pulled out his entire reel of explosive tags. As he fell, he stuck them to surface of his wall, until they were all gone and he had landed neatly on the ground. His hands blurred. Earth release, earth-style wall. Another wall of earth rose up in front of him, cutting him off from the first one he had created. Naruto didn't wait for the second wall to form as he formed another series of hand signs and reared his head back. Fire release, soaring flame bullets. He spat a volley of fiery blast of heat from his mouth, and shot them directly at the explosive tags on the first earth-style wall. They hissed and sizzled, and Naruto ducked underneath his second wall and slammed his hands against it, reinforcing it with all of his might. Then there was a terrible roar and the ground buckled. The second earth wall shuddered and groaned, even as it continued to grow, as the first wall of earth detonated in an overwhelming wave of fire and heat. The second earth wall buckled, but it held back and redirected the force of the detonation. There had been dozens of explosive tags, and that combined with the redirection of the explosions caused the first earth wall to seemingly disappear. But it hadn't disappeared. It had exploded into an uncountable rain of rocky debris, which was propelled forward faster than any kunai. The force of the explosion pushed the shards of rock and gravel into the advancing Rain Nin, and it tore them to pieces. The ground shuddered and splintered, metal groaned and twisted, and a railway cart was pushed over and torn apart as the shower of debris destroyed everything in its path. From behind his earth-style wall, Naruto could hear Yuna's whip cracking as she finished off the last of the enemies, and then it fell silent. Naruto clambered up off of the ground and darted up the wall. His heart was still racing, the smell of fire and blood and death filling his senses. Breathing deeply, he arrived at the top of his wall and observed the results of his last tactics. The explosion had truly been a powerful one, and the destroyed containers and railway carts around them made the export station appear like a war zone. Little bits of enemy shinobi littered the ground, and Naruto very carefully didn't observe them too closely. What he did notice, however, was the glowing molten rock that was seeping from the craters in the ground. The explosion had somehow caused the magma to bubble up to the surface, and it began to ooze out of the ground. Yuna appeared by his side, her whip coiled around her protectively. Her silver hair was covered in soot, and there was a slash going through her flak vest, but otherwise she seemed to be unharmed. She was baring her teeth in a savage grin, breathing deeply as the adrenaline began to wear off. "Stay sharp," Naruto murmured as he observed the surroundings. His chakra continued to surge through his veins, and his muscles were tensing as the station quietened down. Without the fighting which Naruto realized had barely lasted for 5 minutes, the export station once again became deathly still. There was an uneasy feeling, and something was tingling on his senses. For all the shinobi they had just fought, Naruto still hadn't come across a shinobi who had demonstrated a skill necessary enough to cut through solid iron walls. Something flashed in the corner of his eye, and then yellow light encroached on his vision. There was tremendous clap, like thunder, and then a searing ring of yellow lightning tore through his earth wall in an instant. Naruto had ducked just in time, but the heat of the technique seared his face and he could feel his skin blistering as his mask was scorched. He ignored the pain as he twisted in the air, falling with the debris of his wall, and he used it to push himself away from the dissipating electrical strike. Yuna did not. She landed in a dazed crouch, and her whip came up as somebody lunged at her. Her teeth bared, she lashed out with her bloodied sickle blade, imbued with her chakra and the strength of multiple woven thick, steel wires. There was a flash of yellow light and Yuna jerked. Her purple eyes widened in disbelief, and, as Naruto righted himself, he watched as the Jonin's whip was cut away with a single, precise stroke, a stroke that ended up embedded in the Jonin's chest. The silver-haired woman's mouth opened into a little, surprised expression, and she let out a small wheeze of air before she fell to the ground in a limp heap. Naruto clambered to his feet, his fury rising as his chakra surged around him. A gleaming leaf headband glinted in the fires raging around him as the slender man turned around, his gray eyes gleaming dangerously. Naruto knew who he was. He made it a point to know all of the traitors of Konoha. He bared his teeth in anger, his fingers clenching. Rokusho Aoi, he snarled. You traitor. Rokusho Aoi, former chunin of Konohagakure and an A-rank missing nin. Rokusho Aoi, who had deceived his genin team into infiltrating the home of the Senju. Rokusho Aoi, who had murdered Sarutobi Konohamaru's father and stolen the legendary weapon of the second Hokage. Rokusho Aoi, in the top 10 of most wanted criminals in Konohagakure. Rokusho Aoi, the second wielder of the legendary rage and the sword of the Thunder God. The traitorous missing nin, Rokusho Aoi, did not look like he was in the mood for talking. Jonin Sasaki Yuna was critically injured, most likely dead. There was unlikely to be any support from nearby samurai squads. Uzumaki Naruto was alone, against an enemy Jonin possessing a powerful weapon. Any shinobi would need to exercise extreme caution under those circumstances. In Naruto's case, the first thing he did was stop. Then, he took all of his anger and outrage and shock and burrowed it deep within him. After that, he carefully analyzed the scene in front of him. Deployment of enemy forces 1, shoulder tilted to the left, balanced on back foot, no visible strain holding sword. Conclusion, right-handed, uses left hand to supplement attacks, status of the weapon lightning chakra based, able to pierce chakra shrouds and cut through grade 3 flak vest, investigate properties of the blade. This thought process took place in an instant, and it was all the time that Naruto needed to formulate his next strategy. His mind eerily calm, he tensed his legs and prepared to leap backwards, as Aoi tensed his legs and prepared to lunge. He jumped back as Aoi surged forward, rage glowing ominously, and Naruto threw fistfuls of shuriken at him. Chakra surged through his body as he molded a technique. Shuriken Shadow Clone Technique. A dozen shuriken became 100, all bearing down on Aoi. The treacherous Jonin swung the Raijin, and the night sky was filled with yellow light, and a small boom of something like thunder filled the air. An arc of glowing yellow electricity slammed into the wall of metal projectiles and slapped him aside with ease. Naruto felt the hairs on the back of his neck tingle as he landed neatly on the ground, his hands already forming seals. Weapon acted as a blunt instrument, swatting instead of cutting. Identify piercing properties. Wind release. Great wind breakthrough. Wind elemental chakra burst from his hands, and he propelled the great cloud of wind forward at great speeds. The night sky howled as the great gust of wind burst forward, picking up little bits of rock, debris and discarded kunai and shuriken. It wasn't aimed directly at Aoi either. Rather, it picked up a fallen little cart off of the ground no bigger than a person and sent it bouncing forward towards the enemy. Just as the metal cart was about to hit him, Aoi cut it aside with a single swipe and a blaze of yellow chakra. Slicing and piercing qualities of blade impressive, avoid close combat, focus on ninjutsu supplemented with tools, investigate nature of the chakra blade self-sustained or channeled chakra. Naruto immediately began retreating, taking to the roofs of the nearby railway carts in order to gain the upper ground. His hands blurred, and his head reared back as Aoi jumped up to follow him. Fire spewed from his mouth, billowing out in front of him, but Aoi swiped at it with the Raijin and the fire stuck to his glowing blade like glue, which was then flung away with contemptuous ease. Naruto palmed a kunai and suddenly darted forward. The blade came up, and the Raijin came down. The kunai was cut through like a hot knife through butter, and Naruto was impaled the chest. The masked blonde twitched and exploded in a cloud of smoke, and Aoi stopped short. There was a high-pitched swish, and kunai shot down from the top of a nearby stone building. They impacted on the cart, sizzling, and E's eyes widened. Then the explosive tags detonated, and the ground rumbled as the cart went up in flames. Aoi reappeared from the top of the cart, back on the ground, and he held a defensive stance. Hidden on the top of the roof, Naruto watched as the enemy pointed the legendary weapon in his direction, smirking nastily. An instant later, the Raijin's blade retracted and the yellow light disappeared. Naruto cocked his head. Then, there was a tremendous boom, like a thunderstorm, and the yellow light flared. From the hilt of the Raijin came a powerful bolt of yellow crackling light, which ripped through the air in a flash. Naruto's eyes widened and he threw himself off of the roof and just in time, as the lightning bolt tore through the stone building with ease and sent it crumpling to the ground in pieces. Naruto landed on the ground awkwardly, and barely managed a replacement technique to avoid a deadly swipe of the sword. He fell back again, his hands flying. Wind release, wind cutter technique. An almost invisible scythe of sharpened wind erupted from his hands. He threw it at Aoi, who brushed it aside with the Raijin like he had everything else and continued charging forward. Naruto fell back, discreetly hurling objects on the ground as he did so, and as Aoi followed him he pulled on the cable wrapped around his palm. The wire tightened, and shuriken and kunai rose up off the ground in a neatly laid trap. They soared at Aoi, and explosive tags hissed, but the other Jonin swished his blade and great arcs of yellow lightning threw it all aside. In the time that it had taken, however, Naruto had gained more distance between him and his enemy and he had learned two important things. Firstly, the Raijin did not seem to share the common weakness to many lightning elemental techniques, the use of wind-based techniques to disperse and disrupt chakra flow. Secondly, Aoi seemed heavily dependent on his weapon, and had not shown off many other skills. He undoubtedly had some in reserve, so it seemed to Naruto that he needed to disarm Aoi and quickly move in for the kill before the other Jonin could demonstrate them. So that's where you went, Naruto called out loudly. He threw a barrage of kunai and darted away as Aoi again tried to close the gap. The land of rain. What a perfect place for a skulking traitor like you to hide away in. Did Hanzo make you lick his shoes before he let you in, or did you whore yourself out? Aoi smiled thinly, his shadow flickering as the glowing yellow light of the Raijin blazed in his hands. You have no idea what you're talking about, he replied. I know that you were a Chunin who was held back from a Jonin ranking for 3 years in a row, Naruto continued. I know you conned a team of genin under your commander to steal the Raijin and the scroll of forbidden seals. I know you killed 2 Anbu, and tortured a 3rd. And, now I know that you ran away to the land of rain, knowing that it would be hard for Konoha to find you. Aoi tensed, and then lunged. Naruto was quicker, darting back and flinging out shuriken as he tactically retreated. Aoi swatted them all away as he tried to close the distance, but Naruto formed a sign and molded a technique, and the ground beneath Aoi cracked and rumbled, forcing the traitor back. Lava began to seep through the cracks, and Aoi looked frustrated. Just leave, he snapped to Naruto. This has nothing to do with you, nor Konoha. Turn around, walk away, and let me have what I came for. You murdered a Konoha Jonin, Naruto responded flatly. He could feel his disgust rising. What makes you think you can just leave? I hold the supreme weapon of the second Hokage, Aoi growled. The Raijin in his hands grew brighter and brighter. This is the same sword that killed 17 members of Kumo's elite Kinkaku force. It won't have any problems dealing with you. Walk away, Anbu. From behind his mask, Naruto sneered. A legendary weapon in the hands of scum just makes it good. He leant forward menacingly. And you're going to need to be better than good to beat me. Aoi opened his mouth to respond, but 3 shadow clones of Naruto stopped him as they appeared, their hands blurring. A distinct pressure settled in the air, angry and dark, pushing back everything it touched, as Naruto folded his chakra back on itself until it felt like his tenketsu would burst. This unique style, taught to him by the god of all shinobi, was known to few, and allowed him to perform techniques that would normally require many shinobi working collaboratively to achieve. Sarutobi Hiruzen could do it alone. Uzumaki Naruto needed shadow clones to help, yet the results were no less effective. Earth release, earth flow river. Fire release, blazing river. Wind release, great wind breakthrough. Earth release, seismic upheaval. The first shadow clone molded earth elemental chakra and slapped its hands on the ground. The pockmarked and gravely earth softened and became a surging river of mud. The second shadow clone molded fire elemental chakra and set the mud alight. It thickened, become a dark, glowing river of tar. The third shadow clone molded wind elemental chakra, and threw out a powerful gust of wind from its hands, which fueled the deadly flames of the river and propelled it forward. Aoi stepped back, raising the Raijin, and he made a move as if he were going to attempt to cut through it. Then the original Uzumaki Naruto struck, and the seismic upheaval technique caused the ground around the traitor to rumble and groan. Aoi staggered back, his balance shaken, and disappeared under a wave of hissing steam and glowing tar as the surging tide of tar exploded in a magnificent volley of geysers. The sticky, scorching tar stuck on anything it touched, and the wood around it uprooted sleepers in the railway tracks, wooden carts and boxes, and so forth caught alight. There was a flash of yellow, and Aoi managed to leap away from the devastating display of ninjutsu. Wind release, air bullets. From the rising steam and smoke of the fires came a series of propelled spheres of compressed wind. In the air, Aoi managed to deflect one with the Raijin, and twisted around another, but a third struck him in the chest. His armor cracked and Aoi spluttered, mouth opening in shock. Still, the traitor was well trained enough to land gracefully, almost immediately rolling out of the way as another volley of wind bullets shot past him. They struck the wall behind him, gouging out large chunks of rock. A second later, Aoi had to jump up the side of the wall and darted to the roof as a wave of red-hot fire descended upon the entire area. Sweat was beading on I's forehead as he took a defensive stance, the Raijin held in front of him as he surveyed the area around him carefully. Naruto had used the smoke and steam to hide himself. A clone walked out of the mist, seemingly unaffected by the heat, while Naruto took to the roof. You don't understand. Aoi roared. He shook his head despairingly. Just go away. This doesn't have to involve Konoha. Let me take the supplies and leave. About that, the voice of Naruto's clone was dry. Just why are you stealing this stuff? This is a lot of trouble for some shuriken and kunai. I thought Hanzo would have had better sense. Then again, he did take you on. Aoi looked seemingly shocked. Then, eyes wild, he threw his head back and laughed. The real Naruto frowned. It was the laugh of a desperate man, and it had a severely unhinged and hysterical quality to it. Oh, Hanzo would have had better sense, Aoi replied, chuckling manically. His eyes gleamed. He would, if his brain hadn't been splattered all over Rain's central spire. He giggled, and hiccuped. The real Naruto flinched as if he had been struck. What? Hanzo the salamander was dead. Did you do it, Aoi? Naruto's clone was quick to capitalize on the traitor's deteriorating mental state. Did you kill Hanzo the salamander? You don't even know. I's voice was strange. You poor bastard. You don't even know of you, Uzumaki Naruto. The clone cocked his head. You know who I am, it said. I'm touched. Then again, how many short, blonde Anbu are there, really? Aoi grinned, and it wasn't a happy grin. They're going to come for you, Uzumaki, he promised. They're going to come and rip you apart from the inside. Who are? The clone's voice had a certain edge to it, but it received no answer. Finally, it switched to a new line of questioning. Why do you even care if Hanzo is dead? Are you worried? Shut up, Aoi roared. The yellow blade in his hand flared with light, his chakra surging as a result of his anger. Hanzo was a great man. He took me in, trained me, and made me a jonin. All he ever cared about was keeping his people safe. Now he's dead. Killed by those, I hate them so much. The light in his hand abruptly died down. I'll continue his fight, Aoi promised with burning vengeance. He leveled the hilt of the sword at the clone, who watched him stoically. I'll push the enemy out of the capital, back into the downpour, and wipe them out one by one. Chakra began to build up around the hilt of the Raijin, a wave of yellow motes sparkling into existence. Little flashes of lightning crackled around them, and Aoi smiled. Just die, Anbu. E's voice was cold. In an abrupt movement, AOI spun around and leveled the hilt at the large concrete building that the real Naruto had been hiding in. Hidden in the shadows, Naruto's eyes widened and a brilliant light flared into existence. He surged out of the shadows, barely noticing his shadow clone darting up from behind AOI, before thunder boomed through the air. A streak of yellow lightning roared out at him, and he dived off of the building, wrapping himself up in the Anbu cloak he wore. Behind him, he could feel a sudden flash of heat, and then a cacophony of noise assaulted him as the building was torn apart in an instant. Little bits of stone and debris flew through the air, and he felt several thuds against the back of his Anbu cloak. He untangled himself as he landed, barely registering the death of his shadow clone, and had to use the replacement technique almost immediately as Raijin came arcing through the air towards him. It tore apart a lump of twisted, burned metal Naruto had replaced with a small cart on the tracks, and he wove signs as quickly as he could. Summoning technique, arise, Titan. The ground rumbled ominously and a giant hand of stone burst from the earth. It was coated with soot and tar, glowing molten rock dripping from its huge fingers, and it lunged at AOI, enclosing him and squeezing. Then, yellow light flashed and the earth construct was blown apart. AOI emerged, the Raijin blazing erratically, swatting away blades of wind and storms of shuriken and kunai. He lifted the legendary weapon above his head and spun it, and an arc of crackling yellow light tore out at everything around him, forcing Naruto to backpedal furiously. They were fighting quite close to the large pit in the ground, where molten rock was oozing to the surface. It gave off a dim red glow and a terrible heat. Broken tracks led to it, the metal twisted and dripping as they fell over the edge. Naruto darted to the left, and jumped up on top of a wooden railway cart. Half of it was already dangling over the edge, and it creaked and groaned ominously underneath his feet. Earth release, mud flow river. The gritty earth beneath E's feet liquefied and with an undignified yell, the traitor was pulled and batted along the ground towards the pit of molten rock. He raised the Raijin, yellow light already blossoming, but it faded as Naruto detonated several explosive tags around him, bits of earth and metal zipping through the air. AOI disappeared beneath the surface of the mud, and Naruto tensed as the flowing river of earth passed underneath the cart he was standing on. Then, his instincts screamed at him, and he jumped back as a wave of crackling lightning tore apart the front half of the cart. A connector snapped, and with a groan the whole construct began to fall backwards into the steaming pile of molten rock. Naruto leapt away, but something slammed into him in midair, and a blow to the back of the head turned his world blurry. He slammed into the hard ground, trying desperately to blink away white spots, and rolled over. Almost immediately after, the ground where he had been was carved open, and AOI appeared. The traitor lunged forward and Naruto darted back a little too late. The Raijin carved a gouge in the front of his armor, tearing through the high-quality armor with ease. An uncomfortable heat spread around his torso, and Naruto could have sworn he heard and smelt the sizzling of his flesh, but he didn't have time to stop. He angled backwards, and as AOI came for a second deadly lunge, Naruto twisted around and caught him in the chin with his foot. AOI staggered backwards for half a second and Naruto regained his balance, a kunai appearing in his hand. Then AOI attacked. For Naruto, close combat was not the ideal situation in which to face AOI, but he had little choice. He settled in a monkey fist stance, and the fight began. Naruto was not able to block, deflect or parry the Raijin, so he settled on dodging it. The Raijin gave off a distinct hum this close, and Naruto could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up on end as he avoided yet another deadly slash. His small form and good speed helped him with this, and a few moments later he saw an opportunity. His kunai blurred as he lashed out at AOI, catching the traitor in the arm and making the man hiss in pain. It became a fast-paced blur of movement. Naruto's head was already a bit light, and the blow from before was beginning to make him dizzy. As the Raijin blurred through the air, Naruto was sucked into flashes and flickers of glowing light, and for a time he fought on pure instinct. Duck, thrust, roll, kick, duck, attack, step back, roll, attack, sidestep, chop, attack. The Raijin blurred all around him as AOI failed to strike at him a single time. Yet, he was forcing Naruto on the defensive, and there was no time for hand seals. A single blow to the Raijin would be all it took to kill him. Backpedal, kick up the dust, lunge, parry arm, thrust, arm trap kick, free, roll, kunai to kneecap, swipe with leg, roll, throw shuriken, loop wire, titan, dodge, palm kunai, slash, duck, throw, jump, block kick, move low, palm kunai, palm explosive tag, slash with kunai, slap on tag, roll away, detonate. For a moment, Naruto thought it was over as the explosive tag sizzled on I's armor. Then, as quick as a snake, AOI slithered out from underneath it and hurled it at Naruto. Naruto's eyes widened and his kicked it to the side. Then, he raised his hand and made the snake sign. The tag on the armor exploded and a puff of smoke emerged, but little else. At the same time, the explosive tag that Naruto had managed to slip on I's leg also detonated, and AOI cried out in pain as his leg buckled underneath him. It had only been grade 1 tag. Anything bigger would have alerted the Jonin to the ploy, but it was enough to turn the man's leg into a charred mess and make AOI stagger. A second later, Naruto was there, and he lashed out with his kunai. It struck, and AOI gurgled, clutching at his neck as Naruto gripped it, trying to slit his throat. The Raijin fell to the ground, forgotten, and in a burst of movement, AOI raised his fist and struck Naruto in the face. His mask caught it and Naruto's vision swam, and then he was punched again and again, each blow making his mask rattle. Naruto pulled on the kunai and was rewarded with a splutter of pain, but then his legs were kicked out from beneath him and the two shinobi fell to the ground. They grappled. Naruto was on top, still gripping the kunai lodged in the side of I's neck, while AOI gripped his arm with one hand and struck out with the other. They rolled on the ground, wrestling with each other frantically, and Naruto found himself pinned underneath I's bigger size. He raised his head only to have it slammed back down with I's palm, and the back of his head met something hard underneath him. Naruto cried out, and AOI grinned between bloody teeth, but momentum of the attack had left AOI open, and Naruto twisted the kunai his neck. AOI let out a muffled scream, which was only intensified as Naruto managed to bring his leg up and kneed him in the groin. The grip on Naruto's other arm loosened, and with a tug he managed to free it, leaving the kunai stuck in I's throat. He palmed another kunai and stabbed blindly, feeling the blade puncture flesh. Something sticky ran over his hands, and I's frantic movements grew even more frenzy. In that split second, Naruto pushed AOI away from him, rolled on top and lifted the kunai. Panting, bleeding, and sweating, Naruto thrust down with murderous intent. And a swipe of a crackling yellow blade tore into his chest. Naruto spluttered, every nerve in his body screaming at him, and the low half of his armor slowly fell away. Flesh sizzled and bubbled, and the taste of boiling blood filled his mouth. The large sizzling gouge in his chest had torn through several of his ribs, but it had done little else. Had the blade been one of metal, then his guts would have come tumbling out, but the Raijin had cauterized the wound as soon as it had made it, leaving Naruto wounded but alive. As such, he redirected his thrust and brought the kunai down on I's shoulder. I's arm buckled, the Raijin falling from his grasp, and a second later Naruto had slipped an explosive tag on the man's chest. AOI stared back at him, his eyes wild, blood seeping through the kunai stabbed in his neck, his leg charred and burning, his body broken. Then, Naruto rolled away, grabbed at something, and curled up in a ball. A second later, AOI exploded. The ground around him shuddered and rumbled, and it began to break away, falling into the pit of molten rock behind him. Panting, Naruto lifted his head and watched. The charred, burning remains of I's body began to sink into the molten rock, an expression of wild terror permanently etched on the corpse's face. Naruto staggered to his feet, aching, blistered and burned, the adrenaline still pulsing in his veins, and watched as the traitor immolated on a pyre of magma. It was only when his senses began returning to him did he feel the cool case of metal in his hands. Naruto looked down and smiled grimly, flexing his hands around the legendary weapon. In the end, the battle at the manufactorium worked out in Konoha's favor. Naruto was told that Konoha had made a very reasonable offer on the latest contract, and that the feudal lord of the Land of Birds had accepted. For shipments of high-quality weapon and the latest merchandise from the premium weapons factory, all it had cost Konoha was the life of one of their jonin. The body of Sasaki Yuna was properly disposed of, and her name was etched on the memorial stone within Konoha. Naruto missed her memorial service. As her name was being etched on the stone, watched by many of her former comrades, he was standing in the Hokage's office. His face was blank and his shoulders were squared as he stood before the third Hokage, the last of the Senju clan and the Fire Lord. There was a short ceremony, where Naruto returned the legendary Raijin to its traditional owners. He received a medal, and a tiny piece of gold smelt in the shape of an oak branch was pinned to his uniform, an award for his services rendered to the Senju clan. The words and the actions of those before him were mostly lost on Naruto. His chest had been bandaged heavily, and the medic nin had given him something nice, and all of his pain and troubles had sort of floated away. However, the faces of his superiors were what he remembered. Sarutobi Hiruzen sat behind his table, his hands folded. His face was expressionless and hard, his skin wrinkled and creased. But there was something dark in his eyes, a sense of vicious satisfaction, and the old man soon rose to congratulate the young shinobi who had avenged his son. Senju Tsunade stood there, her face a perfect picture of boredom, but her knuckles were white as she clutched the treasure of her clan. It was hard to tell what the Sannin was thinking as she gazed upon the relic of her great-uncle, completely ignoring everybody else in the room. In her presence, the necklace on his chest felt warm to his chest. The Fire Lord topped them all. He watched Naruto with a strange sort of glee, and his eyes never left Naruto even as he prattled on nonsensically to Sarutobi and Tsunade, and as the Fire Lord was leaving, he patted Naruto on the back with a strange little smile on your face. You've done some great things, young shinobi. Oh yes, the noble murmured. I think I will have to watch your career with interest. Oh yes, with much interest indeed. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.